Made to Kill. By Zekamp. Chapter 1 Made for Battle. Good job with the cleaning. Progress towards next level, 60%. Fayette sighed as she heard the telltale ding of a system message. About damn time. It had been weeks since she had last made any progress on her leveling, and she had started to get worried about stagnating. The message was however only a thin comfort at this pace. There was no way she could make level 8 before the year's end. That would make me a laughingstock among the other maids. Should I be changing my approach somehow? Fayette certainly felt that there was nothing wrong with her cleaning skills as she looked over the results of her labor the now spotless garden patio. The Lord had announced that a garden party was due in a few days, and the manor's servants had been put into a bustle. Fayette's task was to make sure the outdoors of the estate were presentable. This maid however would not be satisfied with just achieving presentable. No, Fayette always strove to be thorough. The wooden board flooring that had been smudged with mud now had a sheen finish. The table and chairs had been cleared of the leaves, pollen, and other filth that had littered them, and they too now shone spotless. The dirt path had been evened out to make walking on it more pleasant, and Fayette had even trimmed the nearby bushes to make them more orderly. She smiled with the satisfaction of a job well done. This place was now ready for any manner of event the Lord would think up. That however made her grimace. Fayette never liked when her cleaning efforts were ruined by irritating highborn who did not appreciate her efforts one bit. She was certain that come the morning after the party, this place would be in a worse state than she had found it in. Ugh, spilled magical liquors are a nightmare to get off. Shaking the glum thoughts out of her mind, Fayette returned to humming with satisfaction at her handiwork. At least I can enjoy this sight for a bit, nothing beats the feeling of properly cleansing something. Just then, as if to mock her musings, a passing bird left a parting gift. The harmony of the image was shattered by bird droppings splattering on the freshly cleaned table. Fayette stared silently at the droppings for a split second before a seething rage took hold of her. She crumpled her cleaning rag into a ball and threw it towards the bird with all the force of her anger. "Curse you, you damned hellion!" she shouted, shaking her fist at the bird. Her cleaning rag made a brave attempt at chasing the creature, but ultimately fell to the ground limp, after gaining only a few meters of height. Fayette stared hatefully at the bird as it made its graceful escape from the crime scene, far off from her reach. After taking a few deep breaths to calm down, she sighed and went to pick the rag back up. Those droppings wouldn't clean themselves, would they? It's always like this, isn't it? Day after day I sweep the dust, launder clothes, and wipe off smudges, but what difference does it make? Things can never just stay clean. Fayette's grumblings went unheard as she went back to cleaning. After she had polished the table again, Fayette set off to her next destination, the ward artifact. The mansion was protected from would-be assailants by complex magical wards. In the past, the cores of such systems had been simple warded boxes, but the relative peace of recent years had seen them be replaced with extravagant works of art. In this mansion, the previous simple ward core had been replaced with one in the form of a lifelike statue of the Lord himself. The guests always loved it, but Fayette certainly didn't. Much harder to clean all the nooks and crannies on this one. I really wish we could have kept that old box. The thought of the twat's likeness serving as protector of the manor is hardly reassuring. On her way to the statue, Fayette spotted the guard captain, Bernhardt, talking with some of the woodsmen employed by the mansion. They seemed abnormally agitated. This looks interesting. Fayette covertly used her eavesdrop skill as she passed the men. Life at the manor would be excruciatingly tiresome without some juicy gossip every now and then. She maintained a nonchalant expression as she began listening in on the conversation. "You are sure? There are monsters lurking nearby." "Well, sir, there's definitely something going on. The animals in the woods seemed unusually agitated. I even spotted some owlbears moving to different dens, further away. I need something more concrete to get the Lord moving." "Did you see any signs of the monsters themselves?" "Nothing of the sort, sir. It was more the mood to it. Wild animals have strong instincts, right? They can sense things like that, the coming of a storm. But you don't actually have any concrete findings. No sir, but I've been a woodsman all my life. If the beasties are acting like this, something bad is coming. Fayette saw the guard captain scrunch up his face at that, seemingly displeased. I trust your instincts, but this will be a hard sell to the Lord. I'll go see what I can do. Tuning out of the conversation, Fayette thought on what she had heard. She generally trusted the guard captain's judgment. The man was sharp. To Fayette, he had always felt like a sturdy shelf that somehow never gathered dust. Well, that certainly seems ominous. Bernhard is rarely worried without reason. Hopefully he can persuade the Lord to act. Fayette was not too worried about her own safety. The mansion was one of the most well-protected spots in the immediate region after all. It would take a small army to force the way through the wards. She was, however, a bit worried for her childhood friend, Mireille. The young seamstress was still a resident at the orphanage in the nearby town, which should be safe enough. The girl, however, had always been keen to wander about in the woods, much to Fayette's worry. I'll have to ask Bernhard for details later. Better safe than sorry. Fayette picked up a broom leaning against the manor wall and idly flipped it about in her hand. Lurking monsters, hey? It feels like it was just yesterday when we still played at being knights at the orphanage. In a flight of fancy, Fayette imagined herself a glorious warrior and mimed a few beats of an intense battle with her broom. Her imaginary enemy was taking quite the beating, and just as she prepared for a decisive killing blow, Fayette heard a cold, chiding voice from behind her. Fayette. Just hearing her name in that displeased tone was enough to send shivers down her spine. In an instant, she activated Maid's poise and her bearing grew more balanced and graceful. Next, she performed a lightning-fast pirouette, spinning back towards the distinctly unimpressed-looking head maid Clara. Ma'am. I have finished cleaning the patio and am now on my way to handle the ward core. The cold eyes on the stocky woman did not get any warmer. Fayette felt a bit of disapproval at the woman's uniform. She was not wearing an apron at all, and some parts of her official uniform had been replaced with personal items. It took you all morning to clean that little patio? It only needed a little touch-up, girl. A proper maid knows how to prioritize things. The woman said in a cold voice. Fayette kept her face steady. A proper maid respected the hierarchy of the household after all. At least outwardly. I will take your advice to heart, ma'am, she replied with a perfect curtsy. Clara's eyes narrowed, seeming to almost see through the facade Fayette was keeping up. After a moment of deliberation, she shook her head. Back to your duties, girl. You should work on that obsession of yours. Things will never be as clean as you wish them to be. With one last intimidating glare, the head maid turned and walked off back inside the mansion. Once Clara was out of sight, Fayette exhaled a deep breath. She relaxed her posture and leaned against the mansion's wall. Gah, why does she always have to be so bothersome? Is that something that comes with having a few drops of highborn blood in you? Fayette knew that there was sense in the woman's words, but she did not feel too keen on following them. Oh, she could become a fine maid all right if she compromised a bit, but she felt it would be left at just that. Becoming a fine maid. Fayette didn't want to just be fine. Even all right and good felt too unambitious. No, she wanted to be excellent, outstanding, peerless. The standard maid path could lead her to specialize and become a parlor maid, or maybe even an expert maid. Those were standard paths though, many others had trod them and many more would do so in the future. Fayette wanted something of her own, something more. She didn't really have any grand ideas on how to do that, so she had chosen a simple method. If she lived as true to herself as possible, surely that would lead to her getting the most suitable class evolutions for herself, would it not? I've always been fussy with detail and being thorough with things is also something I enjoy. Surely there's some interesting class evolution behind that? Though my leveling pace has been so slow lately. Is standard cleaning just not working? Oh, right. I did have work to do. Fayette slapped her cheeks to focus herself, pushed off the wall, and set off back to work. Cleaning the grand statue would require a bit of preparation, so she first walked over to the tool shack and fetched a ladder. Next, she carried it over the short distance to the statue and set it against it. This was always bothersome as the statue stood 5 feet tall and simply had too much detail the dirt really liked to gather in those creases. Determined to make the statue glow as if it was new, Fayette climbed up the ladder and started wiping off smudges from the top. Her cleaning, however, could not truly begin before she noticed a concerning detail. "Hey, isn't the ward's power gem looking very dim?" Fayette stood in a deep curtsy at the door of the manor's main study. Lord Castellani himself was seated behind his mahogany desk, while Bernhardt was seated opposite him. Fayette had interrupted the pair's conversation, but this was not a matter to be ignored lightly. The Lord was a girthy man and his oily hands were always leaving prints all over Fayette's hard work. She likened serving the man to emptying an outhouse, something you tolerated because it had to be done. After gaining her maid class, Fayette had dreamed of serving an elegant lady and hosting refined tea parties. Sadly, elegant ladies were in short supply in this backwater holding, and orphans did not get much choice in their place of employment. The still unmarried at 38 Lord Castellani was not quite the employer she had been hoping for. Fayette suspected that his sorry romantic affairs were not much helped by the crass parties he was known for holding. Still, a maid needed a household, so she would make do. The Lord's face, now in a deep frown, turned to her. "So? The power source is a bit dim, what's the issue?" "Oh, right, I was here to report on that power gem thingy. Am I supposed to say something? Why is he looking at me like I have the answers?" Luckily, Fayette was saved from squirming more as the guard captain cut in. "With respect, Lord, of course it is an issue. The wards cannot be trusted to function properly without full energy," Bernhardt said, tone a bit frustrated. Evidently, he had not had much success convincing the Lord before Fayette's arrival. "Look outside, man. Doesn't look too dim to me," Lord Castellani said, voice nonchalant as he pointed out of the window. Sure enough, the shimmering blue barrier which went around the manor didn't seem any different from normal. Besides, the replacement stone has been ordered and should be arriving next week. "Wasn't it supposed to be replaced a fortnight ago?" Bernhardt asked, frowning. "Bah, the Sullis were coming over on that day, so I had to delay it," the Lord answered. "There is no issue as a new delivery was arranged for next week. Girl, you are dismissed." Fayette gave a curt curtsy and turned to leave. "Well, not my problem anymore. Though those monster sightings do concern me." Fayette lingered in the hallway just outside the study for a bit. She did not want to leave a matter like this hanging in uncertainty. Soon enough the door opened, and Bernhardt walked out, face furrowed. Fayette waited for him to walk by her, then smoothly joined along next to him. "Sir, how is the matter? Will things be all right?" The man turned a side eye to her but did not slow his walk. He always moved with certainty, as if he knew exactly where he needed to be. "There should be no issues as long as you lot don't stray into the forest. Yes, the ward may have a bit less oomph to it than usual. It will still hold against any monsters you could encounter around here." Fayette felt a bit of relief at the reassurances, but another matter was still bugging her. "What about the town? I've already sent word to them of lurking monsters. It should keep them from wandering outside the barrier for a few days. Not too many adventurous sorts out here." Fayette stopped by the cleaning cupboard while Bernhardt continued on. "Well, that should keep Mireille out of trouble. Clear mind, back to work." The next day, the tolling of the clockwork alarm woke Fayette up at 5 o'clock sharp, as always. She generally took a bit more time to get up and dress than the others, as she always wanted to have her bed and uniform in impeccable condition. By the time she was done getting dressed and making her bed, the thrum of the steam-powered laundry machine was already echoing through the servants' quarters. Seems Claudine got started early with the laundry. Today most busy work had fallen on the other servants, so Fayette had more leeway in what tasks she could choose to undertake. The state of the mansion's library had been bothering her for a while, so she planned to put the time she had today to good use. After eating a light breakfast, the maid headed to her destination. She opened the library's vast oaken doors and revealed a dim room. Dust and cobwebs had gathered quite a bit here, but that did not darken her mood. Fayette knew that soon it would all be shining clean. The library was not huge, holding only a few lines of shelves filled with rarely read books. Fayette sometimes spent her free time reading here. Technically she shouldn't be handling the Lord's collections for personal use, but servants deserved some illicit privileges, right? As long as such matters remained discreet, they were fine in Fayette's eyes. She lit the oil lamps in the room and got to work. Her trusty feather duster in hand, she started tackling the upper shelves and the books in them. It was a long process, as in her pursuit of thoroughness Fayette wanted to ensure that no book had one speck of dust left on it. Humming cheerfully, Fayette used her sweep dust skill liberally, making good progress. Next, she moved on to the lower shelves. Once those were done, she moved to clearing the dust gathered on the floor with a broom. Fayette found cleaning to be hypnotic in a way. There was a steady rhythm to it. She was completely immersed in the moment, collecting the last bits of dust into one big pile. So immersed was she, that the sound of a window shattering caught her completely off guard. Turning from her sweeping, she saw that one of the room's windows had been smashed, and a short green creature was climbing in through it. She froze still from the shock. "Hey? Is that a monster? Here?" The creature pushed its way through the window and landed inside on its feet, which allowed Fayette to get a good look at it. It stood about 4 feet tall, a pointed, lizard-like face, a mouth armed with sharp teeth, hands ending in sharp claws and a tail that was swishing with agitation. Fayette recognized it from the stories, a kobold. The monster hissed, then bounded towards Fayette. Its sharp claws started to glow green with the activation of some ability. Fayette acted on instinct and did the most natural act a maid could do. She used sweep dust. The pile of dust she had been gathering was thrown right in the kobold's face with precision, getting the stuff all over its eyes and mouth. The kobold shut its eyes as it was sent into a huge coughing fit, which stopped its advance completely. Fayette did not let this opportunity pass by. She looked over the mess the creature had made, the smashed glass and the dust now flying about everywhere, and a burning rage started to grow within her. Before Fayette knew what she was doing, the tail end of her broom smashed into the kobold's head with an ugly crack. The monster was smacked down onto the ground, but that was only the first blow. Fayette did not let up, and smashed the creature on the head over and over again, each blow denting its skull further in. "You bastard! Making a mess of my cleaning, I'll show you." After one last blow, the life force of the monster finally ran out and its body burst like an overripe fruit. The skin, flesh, bones and other bits all dissolved into a mess of brownish-red blood, which was sent splattering throughout the room by that final broom strike. Only a dimly glowing monster core was left intact in the middle of the pool of blood. It took a moment for the haze in Fayette's head to clear, but eventually she noticed a familiar ding, which had been waiting at the periphery of her senses. One piece of trash cleared, well done. Progress towards next level, 80%. Wait, what? Party status. Fayette. Class, Maid. Level, 7, Tier 1. Skills. Housekeeping, 2/4. Sweep dust, Rank 3. Cleaning tool proficiency, Rank 2. Attendant, 1/4. Maid's poise, Rank 2. Capstone skills, 0/0. N/A. Free skills, 2/2. Eavesdrop, Rank 2. Basic alchemy, cleaning agents, Rank 2. Chapter 2 Kitchen Carnage. And thus, the classes were bestowed. Worker classes to work. Fighter classes to fight. Ruler classes to rule. Everyone found their natural place. And the world was in order. Excerpt from the Holy Book of Order. Fayette's mind was abuzz with the implications of the system message she had just received. What? You can gain levels like this? And there's so much progress too. She leaned against the wall, head roiling with dizziness as she looked at the blood which had sprayed all over the room. Does this really count as fulfilling the duties of a maid? Before she could gather her thoughts further, Fayette realized that she was hearing a lot of disturbing sounds from outside the broken window. She bent to peek through and gulped once she saw the outside of the manor. That was a lot of kobolds. A horde of the creatures were currently busy rushing the main entranceway of the manor, while the manor's automated enchantment defenses hurled fireballs at them. The manor was not defenseless even if one got through the monster ward. Still, monsters shouldn't be getting this far in the first place. What happened to the barrier? Fayette turned her gaze towards the approximate location where the barrier should have been and yelped as she saw the destruction there. A huge pool of blood spread out in a curved arc. Did they overpower the ward through sheer numbers? These creatures are crazy. Why are there so many of them? They seemed intent on the main entrance, so Fayette's out-of-the-way window went unnoticed. That first kobold must have strayed from the pack quite a bit to crash through here in the first place. Having confirmed that none of them seemed to be straying her way, Fayette sat down under the window and took some deep breaths to calm herself. She had seen that the kobold horde was attacking from the northwest side of the manor, so at least the town should be safe. That left the more pressing matter. All right, how do I get out alive from this? How fast had the attack happened? Did the guards have time to arm up and gather? Was there organized resistance in the manor? Fayette had many questions, but few answers. She smacked herself on the cheeks to help focus. Right now she could only count on herself. Fayette looked at the smeared remains of the kobold she had killed. She still had a hard time believing she had managed to kill a monster, using her meager maid skills no less. It was common knowledge that whenever worker-class people came under attack, they had little hope but to assemble into a spear militia, trying to outweigh the disadvantage in combat skills with sheer numbers. That was not what Fayette had just done. I beat a monster one-on-one and gained the advantage thanks to my very much so non-combat skills. Then there was the even more pressing matter. And I gained so much experience from it. Comparatively, normal cleaning work is worthless. It was not, however, the experience gain that was giving Fayette a feeling of rapture. She stared in a daze at the mess the kobold had made in the room, then looked at the silent, dripping blood and the gleaming monster core in the middle of the pool. That monster would never rise up again. Whenever I clean something up, it's going to become a mess again eventually. But that kobold, it's completely gone now. It will never rise up, it will never cause any more death and destruction ever again. Fayette felt a newfound feeling of satisfaction. Never before had she cleaned something so perfectly, so thoroughly. For a moment, she just stared at the bloody remains and enjoyed this new sort of satisfaction she was feeling, until an especially loud explosion from outside shook her out of her reverie. Oh. Right. I'm in a bit of a situation here. She shakily rose to her feet, then peeked out the window again to make sure none of the creatures had decided to come this way. Many were being blasted apart by the fireballs, but many more had already managed to make it to the manor and were climbing in through broken windows and busted open doors. Fayette considered making a run for it through the window, but she found the idea risky. She would have a hard time escaping from the creatures if she was spotted running across the open plain. Staying cooped up here seemed an equally bad idea. She did not want to get backed up into a corner if she was found. I think I'll have to make a run for the emergency escape tunnel, even though it's much deeper in the mansion. If I have to fight, I'd much rather it be in narrow, open corridors than out in the open or trapped here. That's also where the others would probably be headed. Still, looking over her equipment did not fill Fayette with confidence. Her current armaments, a broom and a feather duster. Hardly what she wished to take along for a fight of this scale. Though, I did kill that one kobold with just my broom. What else could I do if I really tried to make the most of my maid abilities? Fayette had some ideas, especially due to her basic alchemy, cleaning agents, skill she could whip up some nasty solutions if given the chance. The issue was that she would need materials for that, and those were in her cleaning cupboard, which was quite a bit further inside the mansion. Though, I guess I'll pass through there anyway if I'm going for the tunnel. Fayette felt oddly thrilled at the prospect of rushing off to battle. That first kill had given her a taste of fast leveling, and she found herself wanting more. Her combat options were however a bit limited. I've kept this mansion too clean for sweep dust to be useful in most places. Curse my competence. She checked over her broom to make sure it was still sturdy and was glad to find it so. It should serve to crack a few more skulls before the day was done. The gleaming monster core called to her, so she quickly picked it up and stuffed it into a pocket. Fayette had a fondness for shiny things. Unattended gleaming pieces of rock were irresistible to her. Judging herself ready, Fayette silently tiptoed to the door, and cracked it open just a sliver. The hallway seemed empty, but the broken windows revealed that this was not due to a lack of nearby kobolds. She used eavesdrop and strained the ability to the limits of its range. The cooldown would be a bit longer, but she judged it worth it. It sounded like a lot of kobolds were moving and fighting near the main entrance hall, but the kitchen to the side seemed quiet. I don't think I can make it through that many of the bastards, guess I'll have to cut through the kitchen. Keeping her footsteps silent, Fayette crept forward to the kitchen door and peeked inside. She found out quickly why she could not hear any sounds of battle from here. The fight was already over. The kitchen was a mess. The dishes on the central table had been thrown all over and the floor was chock full of broken ceramics. Of the soup pots on the stove, only one remained upright with the food still boiling within. One of the cooks lay motionless in a bloody heap against the far wall of the room. A kobold was sitting atop the mangled body, silently chewing on a ripped-off arm. Fayette's resolve fluttered for a moment, but she activated Maid's poise and felt her emotions stabilize. Trying her best to channel the disgust she was feeling into anger, Fayette stepped softly into the room and began creeping around the central table. The kobold was too occupied with its meal to notice her immediately, so she managed to approach it from behind and ready her broom for a decisive blow. Just as she was about to reach the kobold, a floorboard creaked under her foot, and the rest happened in a flash. The monster twitched and swept its tail out, and Fayette's broom was sent clattering onto the floor. Acting on instinct, the maid grabbed a knife from the kitchen top and pounced on the kobold's back, over the lashing tail. She grabbed onto the back of its head and thrust the knife deep into the creature's exposed neck, causing it to roar out with anger and pain. Sharp claws tried to flash back at Fayette, but they were in an awkward position and only managed to graze her forearms. That did not stop her from twisting and thrusting the knife deeper in. The lashing tail sent cutlery clattering down from the nearby tables, and Fayette managed to catch a fork into her free hand. A fork which she then slammed into the other side of the kobold's neck. She moved her foot on top of the monster's tail to keep it from thrashing about, which pinned it in place while she tore at it with the cutlery. The monster twisted and raged as it tried to get its hands on her, but Fayette managed to keep the shorter creature under control. It did not last long. With a last decisive thrust using both hands, Fayette thrust her cutlery deeper, and the kobold collapsed in a bloody splatter. Fayette lost her footing and fell to the floor right in the middle of all the blood. For a few seconds she just laid there drenched in red, panting from the exertion and just barely aware of the system messages which appeared in front of her. Another piece of trash cleared. Keep up the good work. Level up. You have reached level 8. 1 skill point gained. You have gained a new skill, Cutlery Control. Progress towards next level, 0%. Chapter 3 Cutlery Control. Fayette stood up from the blood-covered floor and leaned against the kitchen top to steady herself. She grimaced at the bloody prints she was leaving on the surface and pushed herself away from it. She was pretty sure she had never been this dirty in her life. Okay, that was intense. But I gained a level. And a new skill. Let's have a look. She focused her mind on the prompt, and a more detailed overview of the skill entered her mind. Cutlery Control. A maid is always working with cutlery, and with this new skill, it all becomes a breeze. Easily set your cutlery exactly where you want it, how you want it. Setting up for dinner parties has never been easier. We don't have many large dinner parties here and I'm not generally in charge of them. Wait, no, there's a more important situation here. Can I fight with it? Seems like it's still mainly for attendance work. She did not have time to think more on her skill before she heard rapid footsteps approaching from the hallway she had entered through. Her fight had not been silent, and consequences were on the way. The sight of two kobolds bursting into the room froze Fayette for a bit, but working on instinct she made the correct move. She instantly threw both the knife and fork she was still holding at the first of the monsters. She felt her new skill activate, and the cutlery veered with supernatural precision, moving exactly where she wanted them to go. The knife hit the kobold in the left eye and the fork in the right. The monster screamed out from the pain of having its eyeballs shredded apart and stopped right in its tracks, clawing at its eyes with rage. The other one was still moving forward though, now with even more danger in its eyes. There was a table between it and Fayette, but that distance would be covered quickly. Bloody hells, if only I had more cutlery to throw. As she made that thought, Fayette felt cutlery control activate again. Knives, forks, and spoons from all around the room began to float to her waiting grip. Elated, she prepared to throw them too, but the kobold was smarter than that. It had seen the fate its companion had suffered, so it put one arm in front of its head, keeping its face covered with scaly arms. Damn, it's smart enough to cover its eyes. Fayette tried to throw a pair of forks at the kobold's feet, but the monster activated some sort of shield skill, and its scales emitted a green glow. Her forks clattered against the now hardened surface, not leaving a scratch behind. Fayette backed up while desperately trying to think of a new plan. She ran her eyes around the room and saw spoons, forks, plates, all manner of things spread about, none useful in this fight. She backed into the stove and the sound of boiling water snapped her out of the panic. She turned her head and noticed the boiling pot of soup behind her. Of course. She grabbed the soup pot and hurled the boiling contents all over the kobold just as it rounded the corner. Let's see your hardening help against that. The boiling broth sizzled against the kobold's scales and scalded its face and most critically, its eyes. Now blinded, the creature lost all composure and began grasping around wildly as it roared and screamed. The sound was high-pitched and bestial. Fayette took some distance from the blinded creature and picked her broom back up. The kobold seemed to have no idea where she was, so she carefully got in brooming range and proceeded to smack the kobold on the head as hard as she could. The impact had a satisfying crunch to it and sent the creature splayed out on the floor. It tried to get back up, but it had no chance. Fayette steadied her grip and hammered at it. Then she hammered it again, and did not stop before it collapsed into a bloody heap, leaving only the gleaming monster core behind. All right, one down. The other one was still clawing about blindly near the room's entrance. It was making a lot of noise, but no more kobolds seemed to be approaching. Is this part of the mansion clear? What are the monsters up to? Fayette took care in approaching the monster and made sure it did not sense which direction she was coming from. Once the monster was in brooming range, she battered it down without mercy. Silence reigned in the kitchen once again, only broken by a ding. 2 pieces of trash cleared, nice. Progress towards next level, 30%. Fayette absent-mindedly tried to wipe her broom's end of all the blood while she surveyed the scene. 3 kobolds slaughtered by her hand. Cracking skulls with her broom had felt satisfying, almost too satisfying. Do I actually have a knack for this? She was surprised at how calm she felt, especially as the corpse of a former co-worker was only a few feet away. True, she had never been that close to any of her co-workers here, but they had still practically lived together for 2 years. Am I really this cold? Or is this just what battle feels like? It's quite different from the stories. As Fayette walked back through the kitchen, she made sure to pick up the monster cores and some cutlery into her pockets. The cores were shiny, and her new skills seemed to have more value in combat than she had expected. The throws may not hold much power, but the accuracy is no joke. I can see a fork to the eye solving many situations. She tossed some spoons around to get a better feel for the skill, then practiced calling them back into her hands. It always took a bit of practice to get used to a new skill. Cutlery control seemed to have two effects. It allowed her to both call cutlery into her arms and send it where she wanted in a radius of about 4 meters. The skill did not seem to have much of a cooldown, at least with how she was using it. Trying to hurl the cutlery a longer distance made the throw lose its accuracy, so it seemed to be mostly useful for close combat. Or setting kitchenware before a big dinner party. Fayette was rather curious about how the skill would develop at later ranks. Would it increase in power, range, or accuracy? If she was fortunate, maybe all three. Or maybe that would not be fortunate. Specialization did generally lead to more outright strength. Wait, I got a skill point from the level up, almost forgot about that. She debated putting the point in her new skill, but decided against it. It was still too new to her, and she did not know whether she really wanted to lock it in with a skill point. She thought over her skills and decided to ultimately put the point in cleaning tool proficiency. The fight had gotten risky when she lost grip of her broom, and she still felt it was her most reliable weapon. Getting a bit better at handling it couldn't hurt. She mentally assigned the point, and soon a notification rang out. Cleaning tool proficiency advanced to level 3. Fayette felt her grip on the broom grow surer and more practiced. She experimentally whisked it around for a bit and was satisfied to find the act a lot easier than before. Right, that should help a bit. Best get a move on. The wounds to her forearms were not severe, just surface scratches that did not really need extra care. She was honestly more bothered by the damage to her outfit than to her skin. A sullied outfit really unsettled her. Being aware of the blood splatters all over it felt like a persistent buzz at the back of her head. There were kobolds ahead of me and behind me. Seems like they are just running around where they like, looking for people. Where is the organized resistance? I should keep moving and try to evade them. Her thoughts gathered. Fayette headed to the other door in the kitchen. She opened it, revealing a dining room that had been torn apart by battle. Tables and chairs had been flipped over and the chandelier dropped. Blood splatters all over the walls hinted at slain monsters, but the scattered human corpses had certainly not won this fight. Fayette traced a rectangle in front of her heart, a silent prayer for the fallen. If she had any say in it, she would make those kobolds pay. And she was about to get the means to do just so. Outside the dining room was another battle-torn hallway, but it seemed clear of enemies right now. One of the doors in the hallway belonged to her cleaning cupboard, where she would find what she needed for her plan. Fayette felt her anticipation growing as she crept forward. The broom had been working well enough so far, but she doubted it would fare well in a proper 2-on-1 fight. She needed something more effective, something for larger hordes. She had to hurry, but her alchemy supplies were organized well. If she used the materials liberally and threw in some precious catalysts, she could finish the process rather fast. She opened the cupboard, expecting to see her neatly laid out supplies. Instead, she found everything piled up in a messy clump. Crouched above the equipment, shivering from fright, the head maid Clara. Chapter 4 Armed and Dangerous. The head maid was a mess. Her black hair was in disarray and her face smudged with tears. She was crammed tight inside the cupboard, just barely managing to fit in. The door opening had frozen her stiff, but she breathed out once she saw that the opener was human. Both women stared at each other silently for a few seconds. Fayette? Is that you? So much blood, Clara whispered, voice quivering. The blood's not mine. Fayette responded curtly. Do you know anything about the situation? Where the guards are? I do not know. I was setting up things in the dining room, when suddenly there were explosions and then those monsters burst in. Her voice quieted as the woman seemed to fall into a daze. I ran and hid, but the others, did they make it? Did you come through the kitchen? Fayette grimaced as she thought of the bodies she had just seen. She knew that finding another living soul here should have made her feel relieved, or at least something of the sort, but no, she only felt annoyed. I really don't have time for this right now. I'm sure they're fine somewhere. Can you get out? I need my tools. Fayette did not wait for an answer and pulled the woman out of the cupboard, just a bit forcefully. Clara was not ready for the force and stumbled out, falling against the wall. She rose up, blinking with confusion. What? Tools? Are you insane? We need to hide. Fayette did not respond. She was too busy looking through the cupboard for her alchemical supplies. Clara had disturbed things a bit, so Fayette had to dig through scattered mops, rags and various other junk before she found what she needed, her reagent pouch and concocting tools. The types of cleaning agents one could buy on the market were hardly strong enough to satisfy Fayette, so she had resorted to making most of what she used on her own. After putting a spare point into her basic alchemy, cleaning agents, skill, her efforts had been rewarded with some very effective mixtures. Fayette began to focus on the skill, but her focus was broken by a hand that grabbed her back. Hey, answer me! Have you lost your mind? Clara almost shouted while trying to pull Fayette away from the cupboard. Fayette slapped the woman's hands away and fixed a furious gaze on her. Hey, I need to focus for this. She hissed, then turned back to the cupboard. What does that have to do with anything? Clara hissed back. Fayette sighed. Some people were just so dense. She did not deign to turn back and continued sifting through her ingredients. I'm a maid, so obviously I need all my cleaning tools if I'm going to fight. That shut Clara up for quite a bit. The woman just seemed confused as she stared at Fayette. What? She finally managed to ask. Hearing no response, she approached. You're serious? You are actually serious, aren't you? You're going to fight, to take on monsters while armed with a broom. Fayette shrugged, then gestured behind her at her very blood-covered broom. Worked well enough so far. For the first time, Clara seemed to take in the bloody garments the maid was wearing, and then she turned to look at the broom. You could make out the dents in it from the use. Clara just looked back and forth between the maid and the broom. Fayette was glad for the piece, she needed it for the work she was about to do. First, she picked up a pair of protective leather gloves from the shelf and put them on. She did not want to get any of the liquid she was about to whip up on her skin. She had learned that lesson the hard way. Next, she took out a bucket, filled it with water from the still working tap, then began mixing in the various ingredients. She felt her alchemy skill guiding her along the process, making sure ingredient amounts were precise and the timing was right. Some of the missing blanks were filled in by the skill, making her concoction a lot more potent than mundane methods would. At some point Clara had shuffled behind her. She was looking at Fayette's work with something akin to curiosity. The process did not take long, in total lasting a bit under half a minute. Fayette had chosen a mixture that could be whipped up fast. A crisis was underway nearby after all. It meant using some of her harder-to-find ingredients, but that really did not matter right now. As the last of the bubbles fizzled away, Fayette looked with satisfaction at the bright blue liquid. What are you doing with that? Clara asked from behind her. Fayette carefully stored a bit of the liquid into a glass bottle, then held it up. This is what I like to call my all-purpose cleaner. Should do fine work against kobolds too. Fayette put the bottle in a pocket, then picked up a mop from the wall and dipped it in the bucket. She tested the mop against some of the blood streaking through the hallway, and nodded with satisfaction at the hissing reaction. Clara stared at her as if she was some kind of strange, alien creature. You're really going to charge in there to fight, aren't you? With a mop of all things. Fayette cut an unusual figure as she prepared to set off a maid outfit strewn with blood, mop in one hand and a bucket in the other. She looked back at the head maid defiantly, head raised high. So what if I am? I'm not going to hide away or something like that, I'm going straight for the escape tunnel. There was something in her gaze, that reckless confidence usually only possessed by heroes setting out for battle. Without another word, she turned and began walking forward. After a moment's hesitation, Clara followed. Fayette peeked her head out of the corridor and looked into a formerly beautiful sitting room. The room did not have any occupants, but Fayette used eavesdrop to make sure the vicinity was safe. It was not. She heard kobolds shuffling about just behind a bend that would be the main reception hall. Things had gotten quieter everywhere, and she did not like the implication of that. Still, she thought she heard some sounds of fighting, but there were too many kobolds in between. She shifted her scan to the servants' passages and was surprised to find them clear. Looks like that'll be an easy path forward. Where are we going? A whispered voice asked from behind her. Fayette groaned internally. Did she really have to constantly explain herself? She walked into the room and went to a door disguised as a bookshelf. Mansions like these couldn't have the workers be visible, could they? She opened up the door, revealing a mostly undisturbed passage. This should be the safest way forward. It's not that long to the escape tunnel. She pointed into the passage. You go first. Clara backed away. Why me? Are you using me as monster bait? Based on her expression, she seemed to be imagining scenarios in which Fayette gleefully pushed her into the waiting arms of monsters to secure her own getaway. This time Fayette groaned audibly. No, half-wit. I'm securing our back. She demonstrated by mopping the floor nearby, leaving a healthy dosage of her all-purpose cleaner behind. Do you want to walk on that? Clara looked at the lightly steaming liquid for a moment and needed no further convincing. She walked into the passage and Fayette followed behind, steadily mopping the path behind them. Clara seemed nervous as she walked in front, twitching at every creaking floorboard. Fayette understood the concern but wished she would just hurry up already. The servants' passages were meandering routes which had been added to the manor as an afterthought, so it was not a short path to walk. After rounding another corner, Clara turned to Fayette. Say, we're in a tight passageway and you are obstructing our only way back. Wouldn't it be pretty bad if there was like a monster lurking ahead or something? Fayette looked at the sizzling path behind her. Ah, yes. That is certainly true. Her eavesdrop ability had come off cooldown again, so she quickly used it to check ahead. No signs of monsters in the paths, don't worry about it, I've made sure there are none ahead, she shrugged and prodded the head maid along. Clara seemed skeptical but did not protest, so they continued on. They walked in silence, occasionally hearing the shuffling of monsters through the walls. Fayette felt her anticipation rising as she closed in on her goal. The escape tunnel should now be just on the other side of the wall. She could hear the sounds of battle, but the sounds quieted down just as she began to hurry up. Did they win the battle? Fayette poked at Clara with her mop to speed her along, and soon they were at a doorway. Fayette pushed to the front and carefully cracked the door open and saw that it was the human side that had won the battle. So far at least. She had heard a lot more kobolds along the way. She heard Clara sigh with relief next to her and opened the door further. The sight made her stop. The hatch for the escape tunnel had been opened. There was however a distinct lack of escape happening. Chapter 5 Hold the line. The room was in chaos. A ragged group of guards and servants were arrayed in a spear formation, nervously watching the main doorway. The guards were steadily holding their weapons at the ready, but the servants were just barely staying on their feet, leaning on their spears with exhaustion. There had been a fight, and there had also been casualties. Corpses lay in front of the formation, drenched in a vast pool of blood. The enemy had been fought and pushed back, but Fayette could hear the shuffling ahead. More would be coming. She took in the haggard formation, then swished her eyes towards the escape hatch right behind them. It was open. Lord Costello was nervously pacing by the hatch, watching as two guards were lowering an elaborate chest down. He did not look like a calm leader at all. He was looking around with agitation, eyes wild. Fayette could hear him nervously muttering to himself, but couldn't make sense of the words. Bernhardt was standing by him, rapier at the ready to guard against any threats. Fayette felt a surge of anger that he was not among the formation. What the hell was going on here? Were lives being sacrificed for the sake of some box? Fayette began to walk forward and her steps echoed into the room. She did not know what her plan was, but she knew she couldn't allow whatever this was to continue. She felt at the mop in her hand, grit her teeth, and looked at the harangued lord. What if I just... She did not have time to finish her thought, as the lord's head twitched to her. There was a moment of fear in the look, but it gave way to recognition. He looked at Fayette and Clara, some calculation passing behind his eyes. Ah, excellent, more of you survived. Fayette felt her anger bristle at the flippant remark, but she did not get the opportunity to give a tongue lashing. Footsteps sounded ahead. A lot of them. The lord's gaze twitched to the doorway and his mutterings grew more frantic. No, too risky, I have to. He patted Bernhardt on the shoulder. We're leaving, oath-sworn guard. The guard captain fell into step behind him and the lord began to lower himself down the hatch. Fayette was disbelieving. Did the man truly intend to just leave? While leaving everyone here to secure his back? Hey, what the hell are you? She began, but the man turned and gestured towards Fayette and Clara. You two, join the rest. Secure retreat, hold the line. A power settled over her, and Fayette felt her objections die in her throat. Her steps changed direction, and before she knew it, her gaze had been torn from the lord. She tried to resist, but it was like a vast invisible current was guiding her along, not allowing any deviation. To her horror, she realized that she was walking right into the spear formation. She had never heard of or felt something like this. Could a ruler skill just command people? Just like that? It felt surreal, like she was just an observer in her own body. A throbbing in her head filled her mind with an urge to get in the formation and stay there. Inside her mind, Fayette trashed and raged, but the compulsion was stronger. She inevitably found herself walking to stand amongst the others, mop pointed towards the door. The kobold's steps were getting closer. She tried to turn her gaze from the door, to shout at Bernhardt to stop this, to curse the lord, to do anything, but it was useless. A horde of kobolds turned the corner. The corridor was instantly crowded with the short creatures, the horde led by a taller one standing in the middle. Its eyes gleamed with savage pleasure, and it pointed the horde forward, staying at its rear to direct them. As soon as Fayette began to think of fighting the enemies in front of her, she felt the compulsion strengthening her, like a mountain was holding her in place, steadying her footing. It felt wrong. She saw the guards stand straighter and steady their hands, turning into a formidable iron wall. The skill fit like a glove for the warriors, something natural, something that was right. The skill did not suit the servants, they looked like a mockery. Oh, the compulsion forced them to stand straight and hold their spears steady, all right, but they had no skill with the arms, their bodies had not been trained for this. Gangly maids and cooks brandishing spears did not seem too intimidating against the approaching horde. It looked like a sick joke. Fayette did not even have a spear, she had her mop. The head maid standing next to her had picked up a spear from somewhere, which she was nervously looking at. Did the skill register my mop as a spear equivalent? Probably better this way, honestly, with my all-purpose cleaner I can. Fayette's thoughts paused as she felt at the mop in her hands. In her two hands. Where was her bucket? She tried to tear her gaze away from the approaching monsters to search for it, but the compulsion seemed to be intensifying. As everyone readied their spears, Fayette felt like she was becoming one part of a whole. She felt the mass of the others pulling her along. What the hell? This is idiocy. This is what I made that stuff for. With a bucket full of the stuff, I could have. Fayette did not have time for more cursing, the horde was on them. The kobolds rushed into the spears, heedless of the danger as they lashed out with sharp claws. The waiting guards responded with skills of their own. Spears glowed with power and strength, misses turned into hits, some even conjured ethereal shields for protection. The servants meanwhile could only hold their spears steady and pointed forward, they had no skills for this. The kobolds did not seem afraid of Fayette's mop, they kept their eyes only on the spear lashing out from beside her. Big mistake. Fayette felt satisfaction as she landed a hit on one's face, spreading the liquid all over the monster's eyes. It screamed as its face began melting down, which allowed a spear to take it in the neck. It was a good kill, but more came. There was something to fighting as a unit that made you lose yourself in it. Fayette thrusted and parried, mind not registering anything except her mop and the monsters in front of her. She was not completely reliant on prodding with the mop. Fayette had some other tricks to play too. She spread the all-purpose cleaner on the floor in front of her, but the monsters endured the burns on their feet and continued on. She tossed the odd fork to distract a creature, but again it was only a distraction. The fight felt like it had lasted an eternity, but it could not have been but a few moments before Fayette realized the grim truth. We are not winning this. One by one, people were getting caught out. The guards were expending their protection skills, and once they ran out, the formation began to crumble. The servants had been mostly kept up by support skills from the guards, and once those ran out, so did their luck. The guard standing on Fayette's left took a slash to the gut and fell down. A stable hand was dragged out of the formation, screaming as the monsters pounced on him. Bit by bit, the line was thinning. Fayette knew she needed to do something, but her feet were glued to their places, stubbornly holding the line. Hold the line, hold the line, hold the line. The compulsion in her mind shouted out. Fayette's mind roiled with fury, gathering up a storm. No, this is stupid, these orders are bad. Does a servant really have to follow if their master gives idiotic orders, orders that will doom them? No, I refuse. I refuse. I refuse. Fayette lashed out, pushing all her willpower into resisting the compulsion, and suddenly, she felt it break. She felt the world around her rushing back into focus as she broke through. She no longer felt like she was one with the formation, and the assault on her senses almost made her tumble. Suddenly the smell of death, desperate screams and fearsome monsters felt more real, more close. There was no longer any ability coating her, shielding her from the reality of the situation. Fayette steadied herself with Maid's poise and felt control return to her legs. She ran back. It was a frantic scramble. Her absence in the formation would cause trouble, maybe even death, but she had to do this. The maid tumbled out of the formation, right next to her bucket. It had been waiting right there the whole time, just a few steps away. Fayette crouched over it and took out a glowing piece of blue metal from her pouch. It was a brittle thing, leaving crumbs in her hands and pockets as she fished it out. When she had experimented with it previously, she had been careful with the dosage. This time she would not be. She tossed the whole thing in. The mixture began to foam and bubble, and a yellow gas started streaming out. Fayette took a step back from the bucket, then hefted it up using the shaft of her mop. Best keep the stuff as far away from her as possible. She readied herself for a throw, then swung the mop over her shoulder, catapulting the steaming bucket over the battle line. It landed right in the doorway, on the head of the leading kobold. The liquid drenched it, it screamed, and then the gas began spreading. Don't get the gas on you! Fayette shouted out as she rushed back to the fight. She no longer felt the skills binding her, so fighting in the formation no longer felt as stable and sure as before, but the formation was not much of a formation anymore anyways. The kobolds in the back tried to get away from the gas, but the ones in the front didn't give way, and the back line was soon covered in it. Their scales began to scald and blister, and their screams were silenced by the bloody vomit frothing forth from their mouths. It did not take long for them to collapse onto the ground, dissolving into puddles of blood. The kobolds at the front felt the pressure from behind them lessening, but did not realize that something was wrong. They were too focused on the fighting in front of them. That suited Fayette fine. Push them in the gas, but don't breathe it in, she shouted as she prodded one of the creatures into the cloud. The remaining fighters clued in quickly and began pushing monsters back against the spreading gas. If there was one thing that blasted skill was good for, it was something like this, boxing enemies in. The rest of the fight was surprisingly easy, so easy it made Fayette even more furious. The monsters fell to the gas before they realized the full danger of the situation, falling back as they didn't realize just why the pressure behind them had let up. Soon not a single kobold was left standing, and there was a moment of silence in the room. The survivors stepped back and eyed the cloud nervously, but the issue was resolved soon. The one other remaining maid pointed at the cloud, and used an ability. Clear air. She then collapsed onto the ground, breathing raggedly. The gas began to dissipate away, and everybody breathed in a sigh of relief. The battle was over. That's a lot of cleaning, nice combo. Experience shared with party. Level up, you have reached level 9. 1 skill point gained. Progress towards next level, 80%. Fayette collapsed onto the floor and looked at the survivors. Some had survived, many more were dead. Clara's corpse was splayed out on the floor, guts spilling out of her open stomach. Many of the guards had survived, but it was not them who Fayette focused on. As she looked at the trembling maid and cook who were all that remained of her fellow servant staff, she felt the rage inside her condensing into something colder. Her eyes were drawn to the escape corridor's entrance which had been right behind them the whole time. She thought of the Lord who had thoughtlessly tossed her away like a piece of trash, who had taken control of her body. There would be hell to pay for this. Party status. Fayette. Class, Maid. Level, 9, Tier 1. Skills. Housekeeping, 2/4. Sweep dust, Rank 3. Cleaning tool proficiency, Rank 3. Attendant, 2/4. Maid's poise, Rank 2. Cutlery control, Rank I. Capstone skills, 0/0. N/A. Free skills, 2/2. Eavesdrop, Rank 2. Basic alchemy, cleaning agents, Rank 2. Unspent skill points, 1. Chapter 6 Resignation. The survivors were a ragged bunch, nervously catching their breaths. One guard who seemed to be the most fine of the bunch had the energy to mumble a skill. Sense trespassers. He looked around for a few seconds, then sighed with relief. The manners clear. Those were all the rest of them. Everybody who had still been standing instantly collapsed onto the floor with exhaustion. Can't believe it. We actually made it. That gas trick really. Caroline, Caroline. Everybody started babbling, caring little for whether anybody was listening to them. Some were taking things better, while others looked on slain friends with sorrow. Only one remained silent. Fayette slowly rose to her feet with an eerie calm about her. She stumbled to a maid who was staring into emptiness with an empty expression. Hey, can you hear me? The maid snapped out of it, and looked at Fayette with a dazed expression. Is that you, Fayette? It's so much. She began to shiver, so Fayette grabbed hold of her shoulder. Hey, focus. Can you use that cleaning skill of yours on me? The woman snapped back to attention once again, then looked at Fayette, confused. What? Oh, I suppose. Cleanse. Her touch sent all the blood and grime on Fayette sliding right off, and Fayette nodded thanks. Thanks. Keep it together, okay. Fayette turned to the guards in the room and clapped her hands to get their attention. Hey, I'm going to go tell the Lord what happened. You can all stay here and rest. She had a professional smile on her face, just the type of smile a maid might have as she attended to guests. It sent shivers down the guards' spines. Sure. Go ahead. One eventually said, and Fayette set off. She had work to do. The day's cleaning was not done. She jumped through the hatch into the narrow and dark tunnel. She had cleaned this place a few times over her 3 years of service, so it was not unknown to her. The other end of the tunnel led to a forest clearing about 2 kilometers away, an ancient safeguard for situations like these. The more she mused on it, the more Fayette realized just how pointless the slaughter had been. The tunnel had a collapse switch at the other end of it, so there was no need for a grandstand to guard the back. Unless there was some box or whatever that had to be shuffled through first, of course. I bet he's just waiting at the other end with a hand on the switch, ready for when that drat box of his gets through. I best hurry up. The long walk through the tunnel put Fayette into a particularly brooding mood. She had not had time to really consider the situation as a whole before now, and the questions that had been building up inside her were finally released. Can a ruler really just order their underlings to die, just like that? Is this what the divine providence of rulers is? To receive such a mandate of command as birthright, what does that do to a man? Fayette had never liked Lord Castellani. She had always felt somewhat offended that she worked so hard to keep the mansion in a pristine state for such a man, especially as she knew how handsy he was with some of the servant women. Before there had been irritation and distaste, but now she could only feel hate. However, a subtle fear still lurked in the back of her mind. Could she, a humble maid, truly raise her hand against a lord? Her class had an inherently subservient relationship with his, though she had not felt anything as direct as the compulsion skill before. The memory of being controlled, compelled, forced to be an observer in her own body, it still lurked fresh in her mind. Can I even raise my hand against him? If I succeed, will I be smote down for my defiance? He has been chosen as a ruler, while I had to choose the path of a worker. The scriptures are clear that the natural order is not to be disturbed. Still, how could Fayette possibly stay her hand after what she had witnessed? She gripped her mop harder as she fixed her determination. Damn the consequences! If the heavens will smite me down for this, let them. Fayette knew that she had to be careful with this. The man may be a tad pudgy now, but he had served in the military. She needed to be able to catch him off guard to have any chance. I've got one free skill point now. I think I have to put it into Maid's poise for this. Keeping my emotions and movements under control is probably the most important thing for this. Maid's poise advanced to level 3. Alright, that should help a bit. The maid could feel her movements getting smoother, and the calm smile on her face became even more professional. Fayette walked a bit further, and eventually spotted 2 guards ahead. One was dragging that damned box, while the other was keeping an eye to the back, spear raised. His eyes widened as he saw who was coming through the tunnel. Fayette smiled broadly. Hey! The fight's won. We defeated the kobolds, hooray! She walked over to the men, and they watched her with apprehension. One began to speak, expression a bit guilty. Did you really win? How did you manage? Without Bernha? Fayette smacked him on the back. It was fine, it was a tough fight, but we made it. I'll just head forward and tell that to the Lord, no need for you two to hurry ahead. Take a deserved rest. She started shuffling past them. It's just the Lord and Bernhard up ahead, right? Yeah, they went forward ahead of us. Fayette smiled at the men one last time, then headed forward. Bernhard might complicate things, but she was sure she could manage something. The men had been close to the exit already, so Fayette only had a bit more to walk. She set down her mop against the wall, did a final brush off on her uniform to get the last bits of dirt off her, then started slowly walking towards the entrance. After getting close, she raised her voice and cried out. Excuse me. Lord, are you out there? The kobolds have been dealt with. There were a lot less of them left than we thought, and we beat them back easily. She could hear shuffling from right outside the entrance, and then a large man appeared at the entrance, holding a rapier in her direction. Fayette responded with a disarming smile. After a moment's examination, a smile came on the Lord's face too. Ah, excellent. Excellent news indeed. A pleasant surprise, he said, putting the rapier away. Fayette walked towards him and noticed to her frustration that the man was the cleanest person she had seen since the attack had begun, not a speck of blood or grime on him. She managed to feign a normal expression as she approached. The Lord walked back from the door to a pleasant forest meadow, and Fayette followed. She scanned the surroundings but saw no sign of Bernhardt. Lord, Are you safe out here? Isn't the guard captain guarding you? Fayette asked, careful to make her voice seem concerned. You do not need to worry, he just went to secure the perimeter for a moment, should be back soon. Fayette's smile widened. Could this really be a chance? I'll have to be quick with this. How many of the servants survived? If the kobolds are truly gone, they will have to be put to work at once to fix all the damage. The Lord asked, leaning against a tree. Seeing that the man did not hold a speck of concern for the dead, the calm anger in Fayette sharpened further. Before it had been a cold lake, but now it had frozen over. Fayette felt like she could cut the man to shreds with only the edges of her fury. I don't think he's being wary of me at all. He just doesn't even consider me a potential threat. The moment felt dreamlike to Fayette, the calm clearing, the man sitting right there, defenseless, the chirping birds. It removed all traces of nerves she had felt. It felt like a moment of destiny, an opportunity provided just for her. She took out a cleaning rag and calmly started applying some all-purpose cleaner from her bottle to it. Lord, a bit of grime seems to have gotten on your outfit. May I clean it off? She asked, making her best effort at a deeply concerned expression. The man raised his eyebrows at that, but a sly smile soon appeared on his face. Yes, sure, go ahead. It is good that you were one of the survivors, perhaps I'll reward you later. Fayette did not hear the man's words. She was already moving with a calm purpose. The cleaning rag went towards the outfit. She wanted to swerve it up to his face at the last moment, but suddenly there was a strange resistance in her arm. It just wouldn't move up. What? Is my class resisting an attempt to harm my employer? No. I refuse to accept him as my employer. This is no longer my household. I resign. She felt some change go through her, and the Lord shifted too, eyes widening. It was too late for him though. The resistance holding Fayette back was gone. Without hesitation, she swerved the rag right into his face. The Lord stood stunned for a split second, caught completely off guard. Then the sizzling liquid pain on his face began to register. He tried to open his mouth to scream out, but Fayette reacted by dragging the rag down, and pushing it whole inside his mouth. Muffled screams turned into quiet gurgles, and blood started pouring out. Fayette backed off as the man lashed out wildly with his arms. His eyes were already ruined, reduced to runny goop. The rest of his face was not doing much better either. He used some sort of skill, and a bottle of a red liquid appeared in his hand. Fayette narrowed her eyes. Oh no, you don't. She noticed there was a knife in her hand, then aimed. She threw it off with the assistance of cutlery control, and it moved straight to the potion-holding arm. It pierced the skin, and the man dropped the potion bottle. He stumbled forward from the tree, grasping around desperately. Fayette circled behind him, then gathered all the power of her rage into a kick between the man's legs. She sent the kick out, and a sickening crunch sounded out. The man toppled backward on the ground, bringing his head conveniently right in front of Fayette's legs. She could no longer keep silent. You sick bastard! She shouted, accenting each word with a kick. I'll make sure no one recognizes your corpse. Think you can treat us like dirt and not suffer for it, do you? After another kick, she felt a satisfying snap from the man's neck. It wasn't enough. She let herself drown in the lake of anger, and the kicks kept coming. The man's head was tossed about wildly and his struggling gradually ceased. On some level, she kept waiting for something to stop her. Divine lightning, guards, Bernhardt, some defensive talisman, some elite lord skill, anything. It was all just going so well, it was so easy. But nothing came, so she did not stop. Kicking the man's head felt good, cathartic even. She did not know how long she kept at it before she finally backed off, legs sore. She noticed the distinctive ding she had been hearing a lot more often lately. A piece of trash taken out, keep it up. Level up, you have reached Maid level 10. Congratulations! 1 skill point gained. New free skill slot unlocked. You have gained a new skill, disarming smile. Progress towards next level, 15%. Wait, really? Even this? It was all too much. The encouraging message from the prompt was the final straw, and it sent the maid over the edge. Fayette's smile broke and gave way to laughter. Chapter 7 Confrontation. The system was rewarding her for this, even calling the man trash? Was this really happening, or had she lost it? The feeling was however unmistakable, gaining a level always sent a certain rush through your veins, and Fayette felt it. Is this a joke? I was rewarded for smiting one of their chosen rulers? He was treated no different than any of those monsters. Her laughter began to grow hysterical, and she had to struggle to stay standing. It was just all too much. The message even cheerfully suggested she keep it up. It took her a full minute to calm down and look at her handiwork. The Lord lay as a mangled heap in a pool of blood, a complete mess by all measures. Still, Fayette could not help feeling like the sight was the cleanest, purest thing she had seen in a long time. The man would never again bring harm to anyone or sully anything. The permanence to it felt oh so sweet to Fayette. Usually after she got done with work, a vague nervousness would be in the back of her head, reminding her that soon enough she would have to return and do it all over. This was different. She did not have to think a second about this detestable man ever again. She was free. I could get used to this feeling. Is this what maid work should really be? Maybe I should. Before she could fall further into her reverie, a rustling in the woods nearby shook her out. The guard commander walked out with a blank expression on his face and a rapier pointed towards Fayette. Oh, right. The consequences. Standing over the bloody corpse of a lord with lots of that blood on her shoes, Fayette knew she was in a rather compromising situation. She briefly considered making up some excuse, but she realized it would be futile. There would be no excusing this. Instead, she chose to own it. She turned to Bernhardt with no hesitation and leveled a judging gaze at him. Yes, I killed him. What are you going to do about it? She said with a slight smirk. Should have been done much earlier, would have saved a lot of lives from being pointlessly wasted. The guard captain did not respond, merely keeping up his silent stare. His outfit, a light officer's armor decorated with the yellow of the house and the deep red of the country, had few creases or smudges on it. It was an outfit that had not seen much battle today. Fayette started to get angry. And you? You are a strong fighter, aren't you? If you had been leading, they could have held a narrow corridor like that forever against a disorderly mob of kobolds, but you weren't there. She shouted with growing anger and pointed a fork at the man. So many died in your place. It all just felt like such a waste to her. This was not how a proper household should work. Guards protected the non-combatants, not the other way around. The thrill of killing the Lord was starting to fade, replaced by the realization of the scale of what had been lost. You should have done what I did long ago. The way the man kept his silence and maintained that infuriatingly placid face started to really grate on Fayette. With a growl, she threw a fork at the silent man using cutlery control. Why are you silent? The guard captain easily flicked the fork down with his rapier, then looked down at it. A skill related to moving cutlery, definitely a maid skill, he muttered to himself, then raised his gaze at the corpse. And a corpse murdered with a cleaning rag. His eyes shifted back to Fayette. You did not renounce your class after all, but did that as a maid, didn't you? He slowly lowered his rapier down, no longer keeping it up warily. What? Fayette responded, stunned. She quickly traced a square over her chest, warding herself from the evil talk. That was what you were worried about. The man did not look dismayed at all by the situation, he just turned to Fayette, still with that infuriating calm. Many people in situations like these cannot resist temptation, and are led astray. His gaze grew even more cold for a second. They have to be put down early. A murderer can level very quickly. Fayette just felt confused, this really was not the conversation she had been expecting. She looked down at the battered corpse under her. This, oh this, she said, gesturing at the corpse with a fork. Why would I need to stop being a maid to do this? The system even praised me for doing it. I gained a level. She finished, throwing her arms out. For the first time, some doubt entered Bernhard's gaze, slightly fraying the calm. That is unusual. I have not heard of maid classes leveling through combat before, though similar things do happen with some other worker classes. He thought for a moment, then continued. However, you should know that it does not matter who a fighter kills, as long as they fulfill their profession, they are under the touch of grace. Do not take the encouragement as truth, as justification for your actions. Fayette had not known that. All the stories always told of fighters leveling through righteous crusades, but did it really not matter at all? Then why am I leveling from this? I understand the monsters, as cleaning the devil's creatures is surely looked upon with favor, but killing a lord. Deep in her thoughts, she almost missed Bernhard walking past her. Shaken, she looked at him with confusion. What? You're just going to let me go? Not going to do anything? Fayette asked, disbelieving. Slowly, she lowered her fork down. Bernhard looked towards her, expression not moving one bit. I was a guard captain in the employment of Lord Castellani. He explained, then nodded towards the corpse. That is no longer the case. I am now free to do as I will until I seek my next place of employment. So you walked away from that battle just because you were in his employ? Fayette asked. Was that really all it took? He leveled a calm gaze at her, not seeming shaken in the slightest. The bonds of a ruler and their fighters go much deeper than mere servants. Surely you felt some of it today, it is much more for us. Sod off with that. I managed to struggle through. You could have done it yourself when he was off guard. You can detest me if you want to. There are many more like him, many much worse. Getting started on that. His facade lifted for just a second, and Fayette thought she saw regret. It is not an easy path. He finished, returning to the calm. At that moment the man seemed different from his usual sharp self. The weariness in his voice told a different truth, and Fayette realized that she had misjudged him. What she now saw was an old dusty piece of furniture, stored away in a back room far off from any meaningful use. Fayette could not find the energy to keep being mad at the man. She knew her words would be meaningless. What are you going to do now? The kobolds are all gone. Fayette said. She was getting confused about this whole situation. What is this conversation even? You said the manner should be mostly clear? Best we head back and make sure the others know the Lord died in a sudden kobold ambush. Make no mistake, this whole kobold stampede was no accident. Your little stunt will probably go unnoticed if it seems like the Lord died in the attack. Ah, true that. Will that really work? She asked. Her adrenaline was fading, and she was starting to realize that she really did not have any plan at all. Bernhard scoffed. They won't doubt my words. Besides, most will still be in shock. Quite frankly, it doesn't matter much what's said to the lot. The man's cold outlook sent some shivers down Fayette's spine, but the words made sense. The man turned back without another word and headed back into the tunnel. Fayette stayed behind for just a moment. She had been gathering momentum all day since the attack began, and now it at last had come to a stop. She felt exhausted in all possible ways. The forest was pristine, lively birds chirping about in the trees without a worry. It was quite a contrast to the bloody corpse laying in the clearing. Fayette sighed, then grimaced as she noticed that she had gotten blood all over her outfit again. Shaking her head, she finally addressed the last system message, which had been waiting to enter her thoughts. Disarming smile. The smile of a charming maid sets hearts at ease. Calm nerves, ease apprehensions, and dispel suspicions. The right smile in the right place can solve many of life's challenges. I'm really not sure how to feel about this one. Shaking her head, Fayette started heading back to the mansion. She got to the tunnel entrance, stopped for a moment, then turned back. She hurried to the tree and collected the healing potion that had fallen there. Satisfied, she once again started heading back to the mansion. Wait, why am I only taking this? Surely he's got some other good stuff on him. It's not stealing after all, I'm just cleaning away stuff that he won't be needing anymore. It's a maid's duty. She ran back one more time to frisk the Lord's clothes for any valuables. Handling a dead body was a bit unpleasant, so she made sure to put her working gloves on. Ugh, I really did a number on him. How much blood can you get out of one man? Still, he had plenty of good stuff. She didn't dare take his signet ring, as getting caught with that in her hands would be quite bad. She did pocket some of the coin he had on him. A girl could always use a few spare lever. He also had some curious magical trinkets on him, but she didn't dare touch them. They looked far too dangerous. Fayette was a bit disappointed at his lack of jewelry. Do male fashions really have to be so austere? I could use a few necklaces or whatnot. Determined to take something valuable along, Fayette was pleased to find a small orb in his pocket. It was perfectly spherical and glowed with a calm green. It was clearly magical, but as it was not attached to any device, Fayette felt it would be safe. She had always had a habit of collecting interesting rocks for her alchemy purposes, so she decided to tuck it into her rock pouch. She deserved some severance pay, right? Chapter 8 More Severance Pay. Fayette walked back through the tunnel, but stopped once she noticed a particular annoyance. That damned box had been left right there, unattended in the middle of the tunnel. She considered trying to pry it open, but the thing seemed sturdy, it would probably be beyond her. Shaking her head, she continued on. Just what is inside that blasted thing? Now I've gotten all curious about it. She found the mansion in a state of bustle. The survivors had grieved for their time, but once Bernhardt had returned with the news, more practical matters had come to the front. No one was in charge of the place anymore, a mansion full of riches and treasures. It would be shame to just leave it all there, right? Someone had to take care of it all. A silent agreement had passed, and the survivors had come to a unanimous decision: it was time to loot the place for all it was worth. Fayette was a bit late to the party, having spent some time going over the Lord's belongings. She even had a suspicion that Bernhardt had hurried back so fast just so he could secure first pickings. Not that Fayette could have stopped the guard captain from taking what he wanted. She did not quite dare oppose the man. The mansion still had plenty for her anyways. A lot of the manor's valuables were behind locks only the Lord could open, but Fayette had figured out methods to clear a few. She knew from experience what types of locks the different storages used, and a few of them were not too difficult to break into. An idea on how to break into one particular storage had come to her as she was leaving the clearing. After frisking the Lord, she had cut off the fingertip of his right thumb. Now she fished out the fingertip from the napkin she had stored it in. With it in hand, she went to a certain corner in the manor's master bedroom. She cleared the dust on the wall a bit, then pushed the fingertip onto a wooden panel that looked just like any other piece of the wall. Ordinary in all ways except the frequency with which Fayette had to clear oily thumbprints from that spot, that was. A magical glow began to shine out from behind the panel, and Fayette watched with anticipation as it came off wholesale, revealing a small space inside. I never did find out what this place actually held. Hopefully this is the secret treasure hoard or something. Instead of the mountains of money she had hoped for, the insides held only a plain leather bag. Fayette, however, was not disappointed, as she recognized what she was looking at. A bag of holding. Fayette took it out full of excitement, then pried it open. It was her first time actually using one of them, so she was surprised to see only a black void within. Puzzled, she tried to peer through, but no light could penetrate the barrier. Fayette did not see any other options, so she thrust her hand inside and felt around. She could feel a lot of flat pieces of wood and rolled cloth, but not any obvious treasures. Confused, she pulled one of the pieces out, revealing an abstract painting depicting some confusing scene of geometric shapes. Fayette grimaced, then investigated more. She pulled out more things from the bag, but all she found was more paintings. What is this? Was the Lord collecting ugly paintings, or are these for some illicit trade deal? There's no way it would fly if a maid just showed up trying to peddle a mountain of paintings like this. Still, the bag itself was valuable and useful enough on its own. Anything inside would have only been a bonus. Fayette took the bag and affixed it over one of the many pockets on her apron. I'll call this my apron of holding. She used the same fingerprint method for a few other choice spots and managed to find herself a few potions of healing, valuable finds indeed. Usually only rulers, mages, and particularly influential hunters could have access to those. Oh, potions of minor healing were plentiful enough, but the difference in potency was so stark that it was almost insulting to consider them the same class of item. She also cleared away a good chunk of money, enough livres to last her for quite a while if she was patient with it. She had to be careful though, suspicions of thievery would be troublesome to handle. Fayette longed for a good cleaning session just to get all the grime off her, but could not get herself to use any of the bathing facilities at the mansion. It just felt wrong to clean oneself in a place so sullied with blood and death. Instead, she lightly splashed some water on herself from the washing basin to get the worst of the blood off. Further washing would have to wait. Fayette stopped to look over a rack of swords as she walked from the washing basin back to the manor proper in search of more loot. In a way the swords called to her. She had found out today that she did have a certain aptitude for killing. Fayette didn't think she could be just any normal maid ever again. She experimentally picked one of the swords up and swung it about, but it felt all wrong. Fayette was still a maid after all, and what kind of maid would brandish swords like this? It did not feel right. She set it back down, then walked off to the nearby cleaning cupboard from where she chose a particularly sturdy broom. It felt a lot better in her hand. Compared to the sword, she felt complete. It was almost as if her class itself was thrumming with approval at handling the tool. I have skills that can make use of a broom, so perhaps it is natural that this is what I should use. Experimentally, she tried putting it inside her brand new apron of holding, and to her joy she found it fit quite snugly into the bag. This is so handy, now I can bring all my cleaning tools with me wherever I go. Filled with excitement, Fayette crammed almost half the cleaning cupboard into her apron of holding, before she remembered that this was perhaps not the most urgent thing to loot. Oh, right. Money and magical tools and stuff. She jumped off and went back to work. Bernhardt had been rather methodical and fast in his looting, and the other survivors had chosen to leave the place together with him. Their looting had been frantic, but bountiful. They even found an additional survivor. One of the cooks had hidden himself in the freezer, and apparently, the cold-blooded kobolds had not been too keen on venturing inside the ice-cold room. The man was shocked to find the mansion in utter ruins with the vast majority of the servants dead, and only managed to stare around blankly in shock as the others had continued with their work. They left soon afterwards, all as one group. Fayette, however, didn't go with them and lingered behind. Soon she was alone in the desolate mansion. She did not really find much else of value she could take with her. The others had been thorough. A lot of the stuff was set with distinctive heraldry, making fencing it off discreetly a tall task. Much of the wealth of the manor was also in cumbersome objects, glorious chandeliers, fine mahogany chairs and elegant crystal vases. Not really something she could spirit away. Walking through the lifeless and destroyed halls filled Fayette with a melancholy. She had spent 3 long years cleaning these corridors. Seeing the shredded wallpapers, broken flooring, and lifeless corpses made her realize again just how much had been lost. In a way, she felt strangely possessive of the place. Soon word would go out, and some other fool would be sent here to man the place. New servants would be brought in, the halls would be repaired and then redecorated to fit a new image. Fayette did not like that idea. Did some random guy who had never even been in the place before really have more of a claim to ownership than she did? She began to feel annoyed. Annoyed that the place had been reduced to such a state, annoyed that some fool would take it all. She looked at the corpses that had been left here, and she also felt annoyed that not everyone would get a proper burial. Not all families would have the coin to arrange one. An idea bloomed in her mind. Maybe I should do a proper send-off for the place. Just burn it all down. Fayette honestly found the idea rather inviting. The feeling of throwing down a torch and walking off to a new future as the old one burned behind her, it spoke to her. She was a bit of a romantic with things like this. Enthralled, Fayette set off and began gathering a variety of flammable materials. Liquors, dry firewood, newspapers. She gathered it all and began building a grand pyre in the main entrance hall. She poured down a trail of oil from the pyre to the outside of the manor, then turned to look back at the mansion. Normally at this time, the oil lights outside the manor would be swaying in the wind and a soft light would shine out from the windows, hinting at the life inside. Now all that remained was a hollow husk, silent and lifeless. Even the birds seemed to be avoiding the manor, not making one bit of sound. Only the soft autumn wind rustling through the trees woke Fayette from her reverie. She shuddered as she felt the cold touch on the back of her neck. Resolved, she lit a match, then tossed it onto the end of the oil trail. Flames lit out and, in an instant, advanced inside the manor. Fayette could hear all the flammable materials inside roar to life and saw a bright orange glow shine out from the windows, a last, brilliant gasp of life from a dead husk. Without waiting, Fayette turned around and walked off. It was time to head to the village, see her friend, get freshened up, and then get rested. After that, what should I be doing after all this? She did not know what the future would bring, but of one thing she was sure. She would never again carelessly subordinate herself to a ruler. That feeling of being controlled, stripped of her will, she did not want to feel it again. Can I ever again trust someone with that kind of power? I won't be naive again. In a way, her class felt a bit incomplete right now. A maid without a master, without a household, something was missing. When she had first gotten the class, Fayette had dreamed of serving a beautiful lady, attending to elegant tea parties and dressing her master in fancy clothes. Reality had been different. Something in that dream still called to her, but Fayette shook it off. No, it would be too risky, wouldn't it? I'll need to think about this. Can a maid go about things alone? Without a master? I'll at least give it a try. Fayette felt at the broom in her hand and knew that she would not be an ordinary maid anymore. The broom felt different than it had just this morning, heavier. She had a feeling that her future would involve a lot more cracking skulls, and in a way, she was looking forward to it. By all measures it had been a horrifying day, but despite that, Fayette found herself smiling. The lives she had ended, the pyre burning behind her, the blank future she was facing. It all felt so clean. Party status. Spoiler. Fayette. Class, Maid, Tier 1. Level, 10. Skills. Housekeeping, 2/4. Sweep dust, Rank 3. Cleaning tool proficiency, Rank 3. Attendant, 3/4. Maid's poise, Rank 3. Cutlery control, Rank I. Disarming smile, Rank I. Capstone skills, 0/0. N/A. Free skills, 2/3. Eavesdrop, Rank 2. Basic alchemy, cleaning agents, Rank 2. Free slot. Unspent skill points, 1. Chapter 9 Interlude, A plot gone awry. An hour or so later, in a meadow some distance from the manor, a lord was waiting. This lord was rather different from Lord Castella. Lean, muscular, military, face rife with anticipation and ambition. A plot long in the making was finally being unveiled, and he was ready to bring things to a clean finish. The horse under him was as restless as he was, tired from the long ride and wait. The lord kept waiting for word to come, for an all clear, so that the operation could begin. Rustling sounded out from the other side of the meadow, and a knight rode into the clearing. Elated, the Lord rode forward, but the words brought were not the ones he had been expecting. "My lord! There's trouble! The manor, it's burning down!" The knight shouted out, words just barely audible midst the clanking of his armor. The Lord pulled at his reins and brought his horse to a stop before it could get properly started. He looked at the knight, confused. "Wait, what? What did you just say?" "I said, the manor is burning down. Something's gone wrong." The Lord's face fell into a deep frown. "What? Why the hell is the mansion burning down?" The knight brought his horse to a stop and sighed deeply. He would have liked to know too, to be honest. Things were just really not going according to plan. "Lord, I'm not sure. Somehow the kobolds broke through, and there seems to have been a massacre. There was nobody alive in the vicinity, man or kobold." The Lord closed his eyes and let the truth sink in. Things were going to get very complicated, weren't they? It was supposed to have been a simple plot. A horde of kobolds would be led to the manor, depleting its defenses of energy. Once the exhausted defenders went to rest, a strike team could easily break through the remaining wards and secure the target. After all, there's no way a mansion with proper defenses and competent defenders would fall to a simple kobold horde, right? It just doesn't make sense. The Lord muttered. These types of defenses should easily be able to handle such a number of kobolds. The knight breathed in. This next part would be troublesome. "My lord, there may have been foul play afoot. Our plot might have been compromised." The Lord narrowed his eyes. "Go on." "Sir, we actually found the remains of Lord Castella near the site. As well as our target." The Lord's face brightened up. "But that's great news. If the old bastard has kicked the bucket and we have the target, things should be fine." He stopped, face furrowed. "Though. You said there were complications." "Yes, that's the tricky part. The Lord was not killed by kobolds, but by man. His face had been melted down using some vicious acid mixture, and." The knight took a breath in. The command seal was taken from him. The artifact itself was found, locked securely in a nearby chest, but the command seal was nowhere to be seen. The Lord was silent for a good while, taking in the news. His face grew shaken as he finally comprehended what was going on. "What? Only the command seal? But that would mean... No, it doesn't make sense. Why take only the unless? No, who would bother to? Are there any other clues?" The knight nodded. "Sir, we surveyed the outside of the manor, and the power gem in the ward core seemed to have been completely out of energy. One that size shouldn't have been drained so much, so we suspect something was done to sabotage it. The acid, the sabotage, these are signs of a professional at work. That's not all, we just finished our survey and new clues were found." A new voice said. The Lord and knight turned as another horse rode into the meadow, this one carrying a mage. His long sleeves swished in the wind, revealing the barest hints of the expansive tattoos covering his body. "What have you found?" the knight asked. The mage brought his horse to a stop, then searched through the many pockets in his robe, until he eventually found a test tube. It contained a liquid with some fine grains of metal in it. He held it out proudly, but only two confused looks answered him. He scoffed. "I investigated the area for mana residue and found indicators that a major alchemical reaction took place earlier today. The expenditure was not insignificant. Some major ingredients were used." He tucked the test tube back in and looked the Lord in the eyes. "It is highly likely that a mage was involved. There's ignis residue in the air." The Lord furrowed his brow. "Lord Castella is not known to employ people with such talents, this might be our perpetrator at work. Troublesome, but not surprising. For someone to have found out and set up such a thing, they would have to have major backing. Some major faction is setting themselves against us." The mage nodded, then continued. "That's not all, I just got the results for our fingerprint scan. The Lord's corpse and the power gem had the same fingerprints all over them. The Lord bristled and narrowed his eyes. That settles it, this is definitely no accident. We'll have to find where the leak was. I'll not allow us to be taken advantage of. Should we send out a search party? The town is quite nearby. The knight asked. The Lord thought for a moment, then shook his head. No, our assailant is too prepared. They wouldn't choose someone under level 30 for something like this. Catching them after a head start of ours, it would be futile. Showing up in towns so soon after an event like this, it would only serve to implicate us. A needless risk. He turned to the mage. Can you locate the command seal? If we can do that, we'll be fine. The mage nodded. It can be done, though I will have to return to my lab to perform the ritual. The seal is intrinsically linked to the artifact, and that link won't be undone easily. If we make haste, I can have the divination done in a week, and we'll get the general location of it. Doesn't this seem strange? The knight asked, worried by the news. If the link is so easy to trace, they have to know it too, right? It seems like they want us to seek them out. The Lord nodded. An invitation. He started to turn his horse around, and the other two rode to follow. The Lord's face was dark, but also calm. He was no inexperienced level 20 newbie anymore, he had experience, and honor. If he was given an invitation, he would accept it. We ride back immediately. It is an obvious trap or provocation of some sort, but the only way to deal with such things is to jump right in. A slap to the face like this, it cannot go unanswered. Whichever lord thinks they can poke at me, I'll show them. They'll learn. They all will. Chapter 10, the sauna and the seamstress. If sauna, spirits, and tar don't help, the illness is deadly. Old Galleon saying. The walk to the town was not a long one, and Fayette soon saw the familiar silhouettes. Today, the town was surrounded by a dimly glowing blue field. Fayette approved. Good, if they've put the wards up, they've probably been alert. Things should be fine. The walk through the woods had been a bit unnerving. Normally the woods felt familiar and safe, but the day's events had Fayette jumping at every shadow. She was glad to be back in safety. Fayette did not feel like being subjected to the stares that walking through town in her bloody get-up could bring. Word from the others would have been brought in, but she did not want to deal with any of that. She ignored the main path and began circling around the fields on her way to the orphanage. She felt a cool chill as she passed through the ward. There was a bit of resistance to the membrane, but she wasn't a monster, so it faded. Fayette stepped through and arrived outside the orphanage's hedge fences. The orphanage was a dreary building at the edge of town. Once, it had been a fashionable winter manor for some lord, but after a few decades of disuse, it had fallen into disrepair. It had been too much of a bother to repair the place into fit shape, so it had been repurposed to serve as a home for the needy. If you really squinted, you could still see some remnants of the grandness that had once graced the place, but it did not hold up to closer inspection. The paint was flaked off the walls and few windows were intact. Fayette walked through the gates and saw that her friend, Mireille, was waiting for her. The young seamstress was pacing by the entrance, brown hair in a tangle and face furrowed deep in worry. Usually there was something of a skittish fox to her face, but now it showed only concern. Fayette only had a split second to take in the sight before she was noticed. Her friend ran over and the maid was instantly engulfed in a crushing hug. As Fayette felt Mireille's messy hair brushing against her face, she felt that familiar urge to start tidying it up. Her fingers twitched from the instinct, which served to snap her out of the shock. "Ah, Mireille? Sorry, I didn't know you were waiting here," she said, before relaxing and returning the hug. Mireille brought her head up and looked the maid in the eye. "Faye, you idiot. Of course I would be. After hearing what happened. The others said you were safe, but you took so long in coming. What were you doing?" Fayette had not really considered such things and started to feel a bit guilty for spending all that time building an elaborate pyre. She had been a bit out of it. Those events were the type to put a girl in a certain type of mood. I'm sorry. It's been quite the day. It was crazy. I was just sweeping some dust, doing proper cleaning work like I do, then blam. A kobold just crashes through the window. Fayette felt her mind relax, and the words began pouring out. Without realizing it, she had been waiting for a chance to tell someone about her experience. And then I killed it. Me. I whacked it in the head with a broom, and it died, just like that. It felt so simple, so sudden, and I even leveled from it. I had to go through the manor, but there were more of them, so I just kept going. I kept going, and they kept dying to me. Faye, Muriel tried to interject, but her words passed right through the maid, completely unnoticed. And then I found the others, but the Lord, the bastard, Fayette felt a spark of indignation, and her grip tightened. He did it. He forced us to stay and fight, in a stupid spear line, and ran off. I managed to pull off that one gas trick, you know the one, I told you about it. The monsters died. Then I went to the Lord and I killed him too. Just like that. The system even congratulated me. Then I got all mopey and decided to burn the place down, and then... Fayette realized that she felt a hand desperately tapping her on the back and was pulled out of her babbling. She finally registered a desperate, strained voice. Fayette. You are crushing me. She realized that her grip really had gotten quite intense there at the end, and pulled back, blushing lightly. Released, Mireille backed off and took a few deep breaths to gather herself, then turned to address the blood-soaked maid. Faye. You are babbling, and about some things I'm pretty sure you should not be saying out here in the open. She said, pointing a decisive finger at Fayette. Ah, true that. Murdering nobility is something I really should not be shouting out to the world. Mireille, however, was not done. She walked closer, and poked her finger at Fayette's face. Second, you are a mess. I know how you are. If you are walking around looking like that, there is no way you are going to be able to calm down. Fayette winced back, then took a proper look at the seamstress. She was dressed in a practical outfit, a simple and loose grey dress. At least it had been a plain grey dress. Now it was decorated further by streaks of red. Fayette cringed at the mess she had made. Yeah, I really do need to get clean. Mireille withdrew her finger, then gestured towards a building separate from the main orphanage, where a chimney was busy billowing out smoke. Don't worry, I've made preparations. Let's go get you washed up. That was the best thing Fayette had heard in a long while. She smiled brightly, a very different smile from the ones she had worn so far this day. Mireille, you are a lifesaver. She shouted out, grabbing her friend back into a crushing hug. Gyaa! Don't get any more of that blood all over me. Fayette could have gone for a bath, but such facilities were not for the use of meager workers like her. Here in the countryside, humble folk made do with a simple sauna, but Fayette had no issues with that. She had always enjoyed the practice. It felt like it was not just the physical grime she was clearing away, there was something more to it. As she stripped herself bare of the sullied clothes and ran some lukewarm water over herself, Fayette felt like some more symbolic taint was being washed away along with the blood. It had been a day of killing and death, but once she was seated inside the hot room, Fayette at last felt that it was over. She sighed as she felt the hot steam run over her skin. It was like a dark veil that had been covering her senses was finally being cast off. She picked up the ladle and threw some more water on the stove. The water sizzled pleasantly as it turned to steam, and Fayette sat up straighter to make sure she felt as much of the heat as possible. After she felt it pass, she slunk back with a sigh. What a day! So, feel any better, Faye? A voice asked from beside her. I can't even imagine what you've been through. Fayette looked to the side but saw only Mireille's vague outline. It was a dark room with the only light being the dim flickering of the fire, which revealed little. It almost felt like she was speaking to some disembodied voice in the darkness. It was a nice feeling. Fayette had always found that being bare in the hot darkness made it easier to form her thoughts. Normally she was not much good at articulating things. It all still feels like a dream, to be honest, Fayette said softly, voice but a whisper. She felt that if she just closed her eyes and let herself fall asleep, she would wake up back in the servants' quarter, just like any other day. Being caught up in it, I felt so full of fire and fury, I actually held my own in battle. Fayette began to recount everything that had passed, with a more calm mind this time. Mireille did not interrupt, letting the maid get all her feelings out. The tale was accented by the occasional sizzles of steam from water being thrown on the stove. A long moment of silence followed once Fayette finished. That thing with the command skill. It is disturbing. I've always thought that there was more to classes than they told us, but to think something like that is possible. Mireille said slowly, thinking over her words. I understand why you are wary of becoming a subordinate. Honestly, now I am too. Mireille picked up the ladle and threw some water onto the stove. I am however curious about how you leveled so much through combat. I wonder if the same could apply to a seamstress. I'm not sure how it works, to be honest. Bernhardt said something about similar things happening to other worker classes, but he did not give any details. Fayette replied. She closed her eyes and thought. It just felt right. Like it was something I should do. Maybe that's just the type of maid I am, one with a more direct approach to removing filth. Mireille handed the ladle over to Fayette and leaned back on the bench. You say that like you plan to continue fighting. You are a free maid now, what are you going to do for work? We can probably get the orphanage to let you stay for a bit, but I'm not supposed to be staying here for much longer either. Fayette threw some more water on the stove while she thought. What did she want? She had always been a bit ambitious, and the rapid leveling had been pretty thrilling. What would such a path look like? She could hardly just become some wandering vagrant. She closed her eyes and tried to parse her feelings as the steam rose up. Making the world a cleaner place by hunting down monsters did have an appeal, and Fayette did not feel her class resist the idea. I do think I have some talent in that. I managed pretty well in all the fights, didn't I? You know, Mireille, I've never wanted to be just an ordinary maid. I've always wanted to be something of my own, get an uncommon class upgrade, then a rare one, then go even further. Past level 50. The maid opened her eyes and leaned forward, looking at the fire roaring in the stove. The Holy Book says that one's leveling pace is determined by challenge, danger, and following their class's path. An ordinary maid just doing her job and following orders, they'll probably get a common upgrade at 15 and start stagnating, never getting much past 35. Not unless you have some interesting specialization, or are constantly changing up what you do, seeking new challenges. She turned her gaze to Mireille, and the only thing visible in the dark were her eyes, which reflected the fire burning in the stove. So, I was thinking, what do I have to do to become a person who could go far? I think my actions today are enough for an uncommon class up at 15, but what about the next one after that? So, Mireille began, rolling the ladle around in the bucket. You don't want this fighting thing to be one-off. You want to keep at it. But really, is that the way of a maid? What do you think the purpose of a maid is, Mireille? Well, cooking and cleaning, I suppose. Attending to the master's needs, and organizing practical matters. Fayette shook her head. That is what a maid generally ends up doing, but not really the purpose of it all. Why do they do those things? What is the objective? I don't think I've thought about it like that. I have, Fayette said. Even before today. A maid is linked to a household, and her purpose is to make sure that household works as it should. Food, laundry, cleaning, those are things a household needs so that it can function. A maid is someone who ensures that things at the household work as they should. Ensures that when things need to happen, there are no obstructions. Mireille threw some water on the stove and let the sentence hang as the steam sizzled forth. Eventually, she hummed thoughtfully. I see where you're going with that. Is that why you got class progress from the killing today? Your targets were obstructing the proper working of a household, as you would put it. The maid nodded in agreement. She had been thinking on the matter after the fights were over, and she had come to the same conclusion. So, if I want to progress with my maid class properly, I'll need to keep doing that, but will a normal household be enough? There's only so much you can do. So, here's the thing I was thinking. She took a deep breath, and turned to Mireille. She held her hands out. What if she stretched her hands out to the sides, I were to take like a really big household? I could be helping out everyone. She let the sentence hang, and the room fell into a long spell of silence. Eventually Mireille sighed. Faye, are you sure you're right in the head? Did you take any hard hits? Fayette bristled back, folding her hands in. What? What do you even mean by everyone? Everyone you meet, the country, the world? Really? You alone? Shouldn't you start off with something just a bit simpler? Something like, I don't know, a village, a city or something like that. Honestly, even protecting a manor seemed to be quite the job. Mireille picked up the ladle and started twirling it around in the bucket, watching the waves it made in the water. We are small people, and the dual monarchy is a big country. I get what you're saying, but grand dreams are just that, grand dreams. Think about something more practical. Once you walk out of this village, what are you actually going to do? You want to fix things. How can you do that? What's the first practical step? Fayette turned to look back at the fire. Something practical, hey? Well, I'll need something that I can use to kill monsters at least. That's the easiest thing to think of. After that, we'll see. Still, that really only leaves one choice then. I think I'm going to try and join the Hunters Guild. Mireille audibly groaned. Gah, I knew you were going to say that, she said. And I'm sure you will actually do it. Fayette blinked. What, is there some issue with me becoming a hunter? Not really, it's just such a, you know? It's what all the boys with some skill at arms think. Like, if there's a list of things to do to go off on an adventure, that's always the first step. Woohoo, let's join the guild. What, you think it's too cliché or something? You have a better idea. It's not that, it's just you're doing it because you want to get lots of levels, right? You're probably planning on rushing off without any further planning, aren't you? Fayette threw some water on the stove and paused as she listened to the sizzling of the steam. Am I supposed to do something first? She heard a groan from beside her. Mireille began to rise up, but winced back down as she hit the hot steam near the ceiling. Grumbling, she prodded a finger at the maid. You've just found out that you can level by killing monsters and lords, but just how far does that go? Is your theory about the purpose of maids correct? Does hunting wild rabbits count? What about bears, owlbears, anything else? She prodded again. Have you really planned out your combat options, practiced fighting at all? Have you formed a leveling plan? Classing for combat is not to be taken lightly. Will they even let you join the guild? You are a maid. Test experiment. Practice. Mireille accented each word with a poke to Fayette's cheek. Fayette leaned back, pushing the finger off. I really didn't think about anything like that. Well, she has always been better about long-term thinking. I just deal with the aftermath. She decided to try out disarming smile. Well, I managed fine with the kobolds, right? She said, a proper maid's smile on her face. Mireille was not fooled, she knew Fayette too well for that. The seamstress grimaced, and leaned back into the bench. All right, tomorrow you are coming with me. You are going to be figuring this stuff out. Fayette sighed. I guess I can humor her.